you, this is my first multicultural media conference as the new Minister for Multiculturalism. Of course, today you have a very familiar face, my brother and very good friend, the former Minister for Multiculturalism, the Honourable Victor Dominello, who is now Minister for Innovation and Regulation. And we're here today to have an opportunity to listen to two issues to be raised by Minister Dominello. The first is in relation to the Samsung washing machine top loaders that were recalled for safety reasons, and the Minister will explain details in relation to that. And the second is the draft strata bills that the Minister has now released for consultation, and the reasons why we need to move to a new Strata Titles Act. So I welcome Minister Dominello.
Thank you. Minister Ajaka said I'm a familiar face to the multicultural community, having been the Minister for 4 years prior to this excellent, outstanding Minister taking over. But one of the initiatives we did 4 years ago was to make sure we would have briefings with senior ministers such as John Ajaka in his capacity as Minister for Ageing and Disability and the great work he's doing with NDIS, specific briefings with the multicultural press. Because we know how important it is to reach out to multicultural communities. In fact, we just recently had a very successful multicultural premiers event where the Premier recognised the creme de la creme of the multicultural in the Premier's Media Awards. And it is important, increasingly in our diverse community, that we recognise and spend time with you. So I've already given some mainstream media briefings in relation to both the Samsung topic and the Strata reform, but I'll quickly run through the same briefings with you because it also impacts on the diverse communities in New South Wales. Firstly is the Samsung washing machines. The Samsung recall, it is a mandatory government recall on 6 types of washing machines. They are top-loader washing machines from Samsung that were in the marketplace between 2010 and 2013. It's the largest government recall undertaken in Australian consumer history. There are about 150,000 washing machines right across Australia that were released into the market. And to this date, notwithstanding Samsung's best efforts, there are still about 80,000 machines right across Australia that are still in people's homes, about 27,000 in New South Wales. Now, what's the problem with these machines? Why are we recalling these machines? There's an electrical circuit at the back of the machine that is absorbing moisture. Now, when wires absorb moisture, what happens? The wires corrode, and when the wires corrode, it causes a spark. And when the spark happens, fires can occur. And if you get a fire in a laundry where there is clothes, you can have some serious problems. And that's why Samsung have taken these recalls very seriously. In fact, between 2010 and 2013, they've undertaken their own voluntary recall. But those voluntary recalls, that is when they did the letterbox drops, when they put ads in the papers, when they did their own campaigns through the website, that only produced about a 50% recall. And we need much, much higher. So I actually met with senior executives from Samsung last week, and I told them how we need to do more to improve that 50% recall rate. And as a result, we agreed, or I decided, that we would issue a government recall. Now that's the highest recall available under Australian consumer law. And we've issued that recall under Section 22 of the Electrical Safety Act in New South Wales. To my knowledge, we're the first state to issue this government recall. I think the other states will, shortly follow suit. But in my view, we had to take this measure. And in fact, 2 days after the recall, another fire erupted. So could you please inform your communities through your publications to ask them one question: can they name the brand of the washing machine in their laundry? If your readers, if your listeners, if your viewers can't name the brand of the washing machine in their laundry, then they have an obligation to themselves and an obligation to their families to go and have a look. And once they do have a look, if it is a Samsung, then check to see whether it's one of the 6 models listed on the Samsung website. And if it is, call Samsung and they will immediately come out and either repair or replace or refund the machine. At first option, obviously, they are repairing the machines, but consumers have rights under the Australian consumer laws to take it further if they need. And if there's any problem with Samsung, always call Fair Trading. Fair Trading is a great consumer advocate here in New South Wales. 133220 is the phone number. Make sure you call them. But the point is, get the message out. The last thing we want to see is a serious injury or fatality on our watch. So we're doing everything as a government to protect the consumer. I'm asking the multicultural media to do everything they can to inform the consumer as well. So that's that. The second thing that I want to talk to you about is the strata reform. 25% of people in New South Wales now live in strata. That will increase to about 50% by 2040. And I think those are very conservative figures. If you look at the cranes in the air right across Sydney, those cranes are predominantly building a lot of apartments to house our increasing population. When you see cranes in the air, that equals jobs on the ground, and it's a virtuous cycle where people see activity, and when people see activity, people see economic development, more people come in because people say that's the place to be. So we're going to have this increasing demand for population. Strata is a way to house that population, and as I said, by 2040, conservative estimates will have 50% of people in New South Wales living in strata. And to be honest, that should be of no surprise to anyone, because Sydney is an international city. Sydney is like, if you want to look at Shanghai, look at New York, look at Mumbai, what do you see there? You see tall buildings with strata, or condominium style accommodation. Sydney is no exception. So we need to make sure that we bring the strata laws into the 21st century. The last big reforms that were really done were when the strata reforms came into place in 1961. But that was 50 years ago. There's been bits and pieces to the strata laws that have been added here and there, a nut here, a bolt there. And so the strata laws now look like a bit like Frankenstein, because they've just been adding pieces along the way over 50 years. This is the first time that we're rewriting the Act, and that is a big reform. There's 90 separate pieces of reform in this Act. I won't go through all 90, but I'll highlight about 5. The first is a provision called collective sale or collective renewal, urban renewal. Normally, let's just say there was a strata of 4. Normally you would need 4 of the owners to agree to sell the strata or to renew the strata. And if you don't have everybody on board, you can't do it. Even if you had a strata of 100 units, unless you've got 100 lot owners agreeing to sell the strata, it can't happen. So if you've got 1 out of the 100 saying no, the whole thing stops. But let's just keep going using that example of 4. So what we're proposing now, that if you've got 75% of people agreeing to sell the strata or renew the strata, speak to the developer to say, if we allow you to develop this, we will have a new unit in that new development. Or, alternatively, we're happy to sell everything to you and then we'll buy something somewhere else. Unless you've got 100%, that can't happen. Under the new proposed laws, you only need 75%. And if you've got 75%, then you can sell the strata. Now, some people would say, well, hold it, that's not fair. There might be, using that example of 4, there might be a little old lady that's lived in the apartment for 50, 60 years, and she's going to be disadvantaged because you'll have 3 rich men that's going to bully her and basically say, we're going to sell you out. Well, what the government has done is made sure that these reforms are both fair and equitable, and we put a number of safeguards in these proposals. So, for example, if you've got 75% of people that agree to sell, that's fine, but they've got to go through a number of checks and balances. The first check is the fact that they've got to get that 75% in the first place, that special resolution figure. The second check is they've got to go through a very exhaustive consultative process within the Strata Committee itself. So that they just can't rush that through. It takes many, many months of consultations and agreement to get that through. The next step is, even if you get 75%, you still need to go to the Land and Environment Court, and you need to show there that it is just and equitable in all the circumstances. And what the Land and Environment Court will do is they will say, I've got two tests essentially. One, is the price that you have given for each of the lot owners fair? And what we mean by fair is it at least the price you would get under the Just Terms Compensation Act? And that's critical, because that's the act that everybody understands right across New South Wales in terms of what a fair price or a fair market price is. And a fair market price includes, for example, additional money for stamp duty that you would incur if you had to buy another property. It includes money for distress. There's a whole lot of factors in Just Terms Compensation, so it's not just your straight, clean market value. There's a whole lot of additions to that that makes it fair. So unless you've got that as your starting point, you're not going to get it through the court. Then there's another check that the court says. It says, even if you've got just terms compensation, even if you give that little old lady $1 million and where the market is, for example, 700,000, it's still got to be just and equitable in all the circumstances. For example, that little old lady might say, look, you can give me $20 million and the property's only worth $1 million, but I still don't want it because I've lived here for 50 years and my husband lived with me. He passed away 3 years ago, and if you force me to sell, it will break my heart and I'll have a psychological condition, I'll get depressed, etc., whatever. The court can look at that and say, you know what, this is not about money. This is about somebody's health and well-being and like. So the court can take all of those factors into account and say, in all the circumstances, it is not just, it is not equitable to have this apartment sold. But overwhelmingly, I will guarantee you, if that little old lady is offered $1 million where her property is really only worth 500, 99.9% will say, where can I sign? But we need a mechanism to make sure that it is fair, just in case there are some examples where somebody would be prejudiced. But let's remember this, we need this mechanism because sometimes it's not the little old lady that's the one person refusing to sell. Sometimes it's the three little old ladies that need to sell or want to sell the apartment because the maintenance cost is so high because there's concrete cancer and they can't afford the levies. And then there's one rich man that says, I'm not selling because I want $20 billion for my apartment. And then the unfairness is on those three little old ladies. So we need a mechanism that enables us to sell in appropriate, fair circumstances. So you can see through my explanation that we put a lot of checks and balances in place to make sure there is fairness for both sides of the discussion. And in addition, Fair Trading will have a helpline to make sure that there's assistance, and we'll also provide some assistance through some funding for agencies that can help those who are in particular disadvantaged. So that's one area of reform. Another area of reform, and I'll quickly go through them, is that we're going to provide, for the first time, a defect bond. In the past, if you've got an apartment that is above 3 stories in height, there is no insurance at all. Home warranty insurance doesn't cover apartments for 3 stories or above. Now we're saying there will be a 2% effectively defects bond. So 2% of the contract price has to be deposited. And let's just say the apartment's worth $1 million. The whole series of apartments is worth $100 million. Well, then 2% of that $100 million has to be deposited for a defects bond, and that enables the ultimate purchasers of these apartments to say to the developer, all right, we've got a pool of money to fix all the defects that arise in the first 2 years, because most of them will arise then. And there's a whole process stipulated under the Act that basically says there's got to be an independent expert to sign off on what the defects are. If the developer doesn't fix the defects, well then the defects bond can be used to fix them. And if the developer fixes the defects and there's still more outstanding, well, then people still have their rights to sue. But the point is we're adding these protections that don't previously exist. A couple of other reforms is we're putting some model bylaws around smoking, around pets, around overcrowding, which is an issue. I'll just quickly touch on that. So if the strata agrees to adopt the model bylaw around overcrowding, for example, it means that the maximum people you can have adults per bedroom is 2. So if you've got 3 or 4 adults per bedroom, then that's a breach of the bylaw, and then you can go straight to the New South Wales Consumer and Administrative Tribunal and prosecute for breach of bylaw. And it's much easier doing that than going through that very torturous process of trying to prove all the things associated with overcrowding, which is noise, pollution, and let alone the hazardous activities that take place when you cram too many people in a room. So that's part of the model bylaws. We're also giving rights to tenants. If more than 50% of tenants live in the complex, then they have the right to have a tenants representative on the strata committee. But that, they can be excluded from financial considerations. So there's protections there in place. So you can see that there's a huge body of reform. And why am I going through this in detail with you? Because you need to go to your readers, your listeners, your viewers, and tell them about this exciting reform. They get one last chance to have their feedback, to do the fine-tuning. We're not changing anything major. This is just fine-tuning stage, and that feedback is due by the 12th of August. Subject to all that feedback and the fine-tuning around that, we will introduce the bill into Parliament in October, November. And again, in terms of what this government will do over the next 4 years, strata reform is one of the big ticket items. That local government, the big infrastructure spends, these are big structural societal reforms that your listeners, viewers and readers need to know about, because I can guarantee you a lot of them will live in strata. So if you've got any questions of me, happy to answer it. Otherwise, thank you again for attending. I promised when I left multiculturalism that regardless of my portfolio, I would always continue to come back and bring you on the journey with me. So I'll have another conference in the not too distant future around innovation. There's a lot that we can talk about in that space. That's really exciting. But if there's any questions, happy to answer. Otherwise, thank you, Minister Ajaka. Any questions, Vish?